You've found just stories, simple, heartfelt moments from real lives, stories that remind us how connected we all are through love, loss, and hope. Get cozy. The stories are about to begin. From a very young age, Julia absorbed an undeniable truth. A woman's path lay either through beauty or through intellect. Realizing she had a choice, she deliberately opted for the latter. The image of her older sister, Alana, whose appearance commanded universal admiration, always loomed before her. Her hair flowed like golden silk, her eyes shone with the green of a sea wave, and her figure, as if sculpted, brought to mind fashion runways. From early childhood, Alana focused all her thoughts on her looks. Her reading consisted of glossy magazines with tips on skincare, diets, and makeup. And Alana's friends were just like her. Julia, however, saw them only as pretty, frivolous airheads. Their mother, who single-handedly bore the burden of caring for two girls, harbored special hopes for the elder. "Just marry well, Alana dear, and life will sort itself out," she would say. Julia, still a tiny thing sitting at a desk in the 4th or 5th grade, was genuinely amazed by such reasoning. How could one hand the keys to one's own well-being and happiness to a stranger? Had her mother's bitter experience taught her nothing? One day, Julia dared to ask directly, "You married Dad for money too, didn't you? And he left us, went to someone younger and prettier, and left nothing for you or us, because her demands were too high. And now you're teaching Alana the same thing? So her fate repeats itself?" "Bite your tongue!" her mother would exclaim, throwing up her hands. "Our Alana is completely different. First, she's young. Second, she's much prettier than me. And besides, she has me. I had to learn the hard way, but I'll tell her everything, teach her everything. Everything will work out well for Alana, and for you too, if you listen to me." Julia just sighed heavily. Her mother was beautiful, kind, but impossibly frivolous. Both she and Alana lived as if looking at the world through rose-tinted glasses, dreaming of a luxurious life, considering appearance a woman's main trump card, and so on. Julia differed from her peers in her character. She firmly believed that to achieve something, one had to work hard, and the options her mother and sister saw, wealthy patrons, seemed to her shaky, unreliable, illusory. Alana playfully called her younger sister a bore. Her mother constantly tried to mold Julia, to impose her vision on her. At the same time, her parents sincerely believed she wanted the best for her daughter. "I'm worried about your future. How can you not understand? You're a beauty. You got the best of me and your father. You finish school, we'll find you a wealthy groom. Just don't be such a grouch. Men like cheerful and smiling girls." "No, thank you. After school, I'm going to study economics," Julia replied. "Do you know what the competition is like there?" Alana would always chime in. "You either have to be a genius or have connections." "Yes," her mother sighed. "We can't afford paid tuition, and you won't get in on a scholarship." But Julia, trying to drown out her sister's and mother's voices, stubbornly pursued her goal. She spent days and nights poring over textbooks, searching for extra courses online, mostly free ones, because her mother, who worked as a cashier in a local supermarket, didn't have enough money for her daughter's education. Her father was barely involved in their lives. He had a new family. Yes, he sent some paltry alimony, but that was it. No communication, no support in difficult times. Julia knew from childhood that she couldn't count on him. Deep down, the girl dreamed of meeting and talking to her other parent just once. It seemed to her that perhaps she had inherited his character, as she was nothing like her mother or Alana. But he didn't seek meetings with his daughters. And Julia? She didn't want to intrude. Besides, she was afraid of encountering indifference or worse, dislike from a relative. Her father was a businessman, owned a chain of stores, seemed to earn well. He had shrewdly registered his property in his new wife's name so his ex-wife and children couldn't claim anything. It seemed petty, ugly. Julia should have been offended by her father, like her mother, like Alana. But Julia had a different dream: to study economics, create her own business, and one day meet her father on business. a joint project, a profitable contract, something like that. Let him see what his daughter had achieved on her own, without his help. And then, perhaps, they could talk as equals. And Julia achieved her goal. She got a scholarship spot in the very economics faculty she had aspired to. How she rejoiced when she saw her name on the list of admitted students. She screamed in front of the computer screen, jumped for joy. "Have you gone mad?" Alana peeked into the room with little Leo in her arms. She had recently become a mother, giving birth to a son by a wealthy man. He paid child support regularly, but showed no desire to communicate with his mother or with Leo himself. Needless to say, the child support was meager. The standard scheme, undeclared income, most earnings hidden. Alana had, after all, repeated her mother's fate, in an even more bitter version. But she wasn't going to give up, and continued to dream of a prince who would sooner or later solve all her financial problems. Her mother supported her elder daughter in everything, adored her grandson. That was no surprise. Julia also enjoyed playing with the baby when she found the time. But the girl saw, you can make as many plans as you want, but if they are based on hoping for another person, it's shaky and often fails. It was time to choose a different path. But no, Alana still spent time on dating sites, looking for bigger prey. "I got in," Julia explained her wild jubilation to her sister. "Wow, cool. Does that mean you'll move out? Go to the city to study?" Julia's family actually lived in a city too, but a very small one, far from the regional center. Gray three-story buildings, streets of old wooden barracks, a huge private sector. Not a village on paper, of course, but essentially one. That's why everyone called Oakwood, the regional capital where Julia's university was located, the city. Her mother was also happy to hear about her younger daughter's admission. As it turned out, she hadn't even hoped for such a thing. She thought, let the little one be stubborn, and then, after listening to her more experienced relatives, she'll understand that she needs to find a rich and reliable man. And look how things turned out. "You got in. Well done, daughter." Her mother hugged the younger girl. "I'll help you however I can. I'm sorry, I won't be able to send much money, but I'll find a little for housing, for living. Also, you need to dress nicely in the big city, and there are more chances to meet a decent man." "Mom, there you go again." Julia smiled. She was touched that her mother supported her, understood, and even offered help. Julia knew that this money didn't come easily to her mother, but she was willing to help her daughter while she was a student, and that was priceless. Julia's new life began. She was allocated a place in the student dormitory, although she had to share a room with 2 girls. But the roommates turned out to be very pleasant. Both were studying education. Both, like Julia, were focused on their studies and future work. In short, the girls had a lot in common. Julia became friends with one of them, Katie. They kept in touch even after graduating and moving into rented apartments. Julia liked her studies. Already in her first year, she was convinced that she had chosen the right direction. Economics came easily, lectures seemed fascinating, and term papers and tests were incredibly simple. Julia even started earning money. It turned out people were willing to pay a good amount for essays and projects. Good amount, of course, by a student's standards. The girl had to work part-time, study a lot. There was absolutely no time left for student parties, clubbing, and other entertainment. Sometimes, of course, she wanted to go out, relax. But the girl understood. Every minute counted, her time was too valuable. Besides, she had little money. Her mother sent her a small sum every month. Julia knew it was a significant part of her parents' salary, and was immensely grateful. It wasn't much, very little, but it was her mother's help that allowed Julia to stay afloat. Especially after the 3rd year, when something suddenly changed at the university clinic, and students were required to pay for the dormitory. Before, it had been free. Julia economized on literally everything, but she didn't despair. She knew she was working towards her goal, which meant sooner or later everything would work out. Everything would be just as she had planned it herself. But before the new year, an event occurred that forced Julia to reconsider her plans and turned her whole life upside down. It happened during that anxious time when students rush to pass all their tests before the holidays so they can start the session after the new year without debts. Julia was preparing for an economics history test when her sister called. Alana's photo appeared on the screen. The girl in it was smiling broadly and looked like a star. Julia immediately understood. Something had happened. Alana wouldn't just call at 1 in the morning. It was Julia who was awake, preparing for exams, and her sister should have been deep asleep by then. "Something's wrong with Mom." Alana's voice, ringing with hysteria, came through the receiver. She seemed on the verge of breaking down. "Come home." What happened? Julia felt her limbs turn cold, and her stomach felt empty. Anxiety squeezed her heart with an icy, rough hand. "The bus. What? When? She's alive." It was impossible to get coherent answers from Alana. She was already sobbing and whimpering into the phone, dropping only scattered, insignificant phrases. Mostly, it was wailing about how scared and bad she felt. Apparently, the trouble had happened that evening, but Alana had only been told just now, a couple of minutes ago, and she had immediately called her sister. Of course, there was no question of tests or exams at that moment. The next morning, Julia took the first bus home. At the bus station at such an early hour, she was almost the only passenger. Julia found her sister in a terrible state, disheveled hair, a face swollen from tears. In her arms, she held her youngest daughter, tiny Mila. Alana was already a mother of 3. First came her son Leo, then 2 girls born a year apart, Christina and Mila. None of the fathers participated in raising them. The princes, sons of wealthy parents, refused to raise their offspring and bought them off with meager alimony. With Alana, they were just having fun, not thinking of anything serious. "What about me? What about them? My children? If something happens to her, how will I manage with them alone?" Alana looked at Julia with bewildered eyes, as if expecting her to suggest a solution. But Julia, she was ready to hit her sister at that moment. They didn't know what was wrong with their mother, and all she could think about was herself. "How did it happen?" At my place, they said Mom was crossing the road in the wrong place. She ran right in front of the bus. The driver couldn't do anything. He's in shock himself. He's in the hospital too now, apparently. He had a heart attack right there, on the spot. While they were sorting things out, they called me late at night, and I called you right away." "So Mom is alive?" Julia clarified. That was the most important thing for her. "In the hospital at St. Jude's." Julia rushed out of the house, calling a taxi as she went. She had to get there as soon as possible, had to understand what was happening to her loved one. At the hospital, Julia was given the terrible news. Her mother was gone. She had passed away very recently, just as Julia was rushing to the clinic. It all happened in the intensive care unit. The doctors said the injuries were too severe, and Julia wouldn't have been able to say goodbye to her mother anyway. She was in a coma. And still, the girl blamed herself for not holding her mother's hand while she was still. Julia was signing some papers when a sobbing Alana called her. Someone she knew had brought her to the hospital. It was a difficult time, organizing the funeral, trying to bring her sister back to her senses, who had to, despite everything, take care of her little ones, and the gradual realization of the terrible truth. The dearest and closest person in the world was gone. Just gone, that's all. Her father didn't show up at the funeral, although he couldn't not have known what happened. This man didn't even call his daughters, didn't try to understand if they needed his help. He probably considered them adults. Both were over 18, meaning legally, their father was no longer indebted to them. He had paid alimony regularly until the girls reached adulthood, and they couldn't expect more. It was then that Julia understood she wouldn't meet or communicate with this man. Even they, Alana and their mother, weren't needed by him. Nor did they need him. No resentment arose. No, Julia simply realized that her father was completely a stranger to her. Perhaps they were similar in some ways, but her father, he was a stranger. Just a stranger. And that said it all. But Alana, she was family. and she needed support. Her sister cried nonstop for several days, and Julia didn't stop her. Let her cry it out. It would make it easier for her. While her sister was coping with her grief, Julia helped her with her nephews and nieces. The little ones, even in such a terrible situation, made her smile. It was impossible to look indifferently at their funny games, to listen to their sweet babbling. More than anything else, her nephews and nieces showed Julia. Life goes on. Julia couldn't stay with her sister for long. The winter session was coming. And Alana had already recovered a little, even started monitoring dating sites again. Now she wanted an adult, supportive person by her side even more. Her mother was no longer there. Julia, despite everything, passed her session with excellent grades. This meant she could stay in the dormitory, but the dormitory had become paid, and she also needed to eat, dress, and pay for transport. Julia tried to combine studying and working in a cafeteria. It turned out to be impossible. She immediately accumulated a pile of absences and debts. In the end, the girl didn't even get permission to take the next session. Expulsion loomed ahead. Julia tried to negotiate with her professors, asked for a chance, promised to pass everything, but she still couldn't manage. The only way out was to transfer to distance learning. The catch was, all the scholarship spots were taken, and the commercial option cost a fortune. The rector offered a solution. One day he called Julia to his office and proposed the only option he thought was suitable. "I know your situation," the man began, in a fatherly tone, always reminding Julia of Carlson, just as good-natured, plump, and short. "You're a diligent, promising student. I want to help someone like you. So, despite everything, I'll sign off on your session. Even if it's just passing grades, we'll mark them. And you take a year's academic leave. I'll help with that. You'll get it. You're a determined person. And then you'll re-enroll, and I'll help with all the details again. How does that sound?" Julia thought it over. She didn't want to interrupt her studies. On the other hand, what other options did she have? The session wasn't passed. That was certain. That meant expulsion. And where would she go? Go home? To her parents' apartment? Well, Alana's new suitor was already living there, a young and seemingly good guy named Stephen. Unlike Alana's previous admirers, he wasn't a rich guy. He worked in construction, toiled from dawn till dusk, seemed to earn a living. Alana loved him very much, and he had accepted all her children. Perhaps they really would become a family. Julia was completely superfluous there now, and she herself didn't want to live with her sister. No, Julia loved her very much. She was the only relative in the whole world. And yet, Julia was used to peace, solitude, freedom. And there was a large family there. That wouldn't work. And finally, she didn't want to leave Oakwood. It was a big city, beautiful, spacious, interesting. There were more prospects for work and study here. The town where Julia had spent her childhood was associated by the girl solely with melancholy. No, she absolutely did not want to go back there. "You know, I think I'll take your offer," Julia smiled at the rector. "That's a good girl," the man beamed. "You're doing well. Everything will work out for you. Just don't forget to save up for your studies. Be sure to come back to the university in a year. We'll be waiting for you. Agreed?" Agreed. Thanking him for the offer, that same evening Julia began searching for work. She urgently needed money, just to survive, buy food, pay for a roof over her head. The most effective motivation there was. It turned out that finding anything close to her desired profession was simply unrealistic for a girl with unfinished higher education. Julia was rejected everywhere. Employers didn't even consider candidates without a diploma. The girl understood that she could certainly prove herself in an interview, but it never even got to that point. After a couple of days of fruitless searching, Julia realized it was time to let go of her dream of working as an economist, or rather, to postpone it until better times. And for now, she needed to find anything at all. When she lowered her expectations somewhat, things went better. Many vacancies were available for Julia: waitress, cleaner, sales assistant. True, the salaries offered were meager. No, it would be enough to live on. especially if she economized. But Julia needed to save up for her studies in a year, and with such salaries that was impossible. And yet, Julia urgently needed a job, immediately. She chose the path of a waitress in a bar in the city center. There were enough reasons for this place. Firstly, night shifts came with extra pay. Secondly, tips were a great help, sometimes even very generous. And thirdly, shift work gave Julia the opportunity to write term papers and tests for others, an extra penny for her savings, and her brain didn't stagnate. All pluses. Julia even liked working at the bar. The staff was friendly and close-knit, the management was loyal, the clientele was decent. It was a rock bar whose owners cared about their reputation. They maintained the atmosphere. Undesirable elements were escorted out by security and not allowed back. And also, musicians gathered here every evening, local bands and performers, visiting guests. In short, live music. And it was wonderful. Julia enjoyed listening to the musicians perform, sang along. It was welcomed in the bar. Work felt like a celebration. In the bar, Julia finally understood the meaning of that common phrase. Of course, you couldn't save much from a waitress's salary. Julia was simultaneously looking for another, higher-paying job. But the girl knew. Even when she had to quit, she would come back here as a visitor, just to be in this wonderfully warm atmosphere. The rock bar and new friends helped Julia get through her grief. Of course, the longing for her mother hadn't disappeared, but the girl was finally able to return to life and believe that there was still a lot of good ahead. It was in the rock bar that Julia met Sebastian. One day, the host introduced a new rock band to the guests, which had appeared just a couple of months ago. Sebastian was the bassist, but not only that. He was the one who had the idea to create this band. He was the one who wrote the songs and music. Modest, always staying in the background, but constantly observing everything, the behavior of the band members, the audience's reaction. Sebastian was the leader of the team, although on stage, the vocalist attracted most of the attention. It was noticeable at first glance. For some reason, Julia immediately singled him out and was drawn to him. She didn't recognize herself. Julia perfectly understood that she was not in a position to fall in love and start romances. She was focused on her career, on her studies, on re-enrolling in university. She couldn't afford to be distracted by all this, couldn't lose focus. And yet, Sebastian didn't joke or flirt with the waitresses. He was focused on his work. Perhaps that's what captivated the girl. Sebastian was very much like herself. Sebastian started coming to the bar often, sometimes with the band to work, sometimes just with friends to relax. Of course, they soon got acquainted, but he still acted somewhat distant, didn't show open affection. Although sometimes Julia did catch his eye. True, Sebastian immediately looked away. Julia wanted him to notice her, compliment her, show her attention, as visitors often did. And then Julia would let him know that she was interested in him. One day, a girl was in Sebastian's company. No, female representatives had come with him before, friends, girls from the band. But this one, there was clearly something between her and Sebastian. They weren't kissing or hugging, nothing like that. But sometimes they exchanged tender glances and smiled at each other very warmly. And one day she rested her head right on his shoulder, and Sebastian, usually cold and even stern, stroked her hair with a natural, very gentle gesture, like a kitten. A very unpleasant feeling stirred in Julia's chest. She, of course, immediately recognized it. It was jealousy. With surprising meticulousness, Julia began to search for flaws in her rival. Too thin, even skinny, it wasn't attractive. A long nose. Her hair was somehow too thin. In short, how could this madam compare to her, to Julia? It seemed for the first time in her life, Julia felt a sense of smugness about her appearance. Nature had endowed her, like Alana, with beauty. Julia had heard compliments many times about her figure. Tall, slender, long-legged. Her friends even unanimously advised her to try modeling. Only that work was not at all to Julia's liking. She didn't know how to showcase herself, even considered it somewhat humiliating. Despite such impressive looks, Julia's rival turned out to be such a blue stocking. In short, there was nothing outstanding about Sebastian's companion, nothing for the eye to latch onto. Nevertheless, he clearly felt very tender feelings for her. The presence of this girl made him happy. Julia watched Sebastian carefully and could say, this was certain. He loved his companion. It was painful. Thanks to the girl who clung to Sebastian like that, Julia finally decided. She decided to do something she had previously considered unacceptable for herself. Her shift was almost over, but as usual she stayed late to help her friend waitress with the tables. Saturday night. Julia waited for the right moment. Before that, she had a drink for courage, to feel more confident and relaxed. Sebastian stood up and headed for the exit. Someone had called him. The music was blaring in the bar. Talking on the phone in such an environment was impossible. Everyone went out, some onto the street, onto the bar's porch, some to the smoking area. Sebastian chose the street. Julia followed him like a shadow. Now or never. The unpleasant girl who had been sitting next to Sebastian all evening remained at the table. She was chatting cheerfully with his friends. It was clear they had known each other for a long time. Perhaps it was a long and serious relationship. And yet Julia would try. Otherwise she would regret later that she hadn't even tried. Sebastian stepped out onto the porch. He paced the small area in front of the bar with long strides, patiently explaining something to someone. Julia watched him through the large window on the door. Sebastian wasn't smiling, wasn't joking. The conversation was clearly serious or unpleasant. It didn't matter. Julia would approach him anyway. As soon as Sebastian hung up and was about to return to the bar, Julia came out to meet him at that moment. Fortunately, they were completely alone on the porch at that moment. "Hi," Julia smiled at him. "Hi." Sebastian looked at the girl with interest. "Didn't we already say hello?" "Yes, we did," Julia nodded. I need to talk to you." Sebastian somehow stopped immediately, braced himself for a conversation, showing by his whole demeanor that he was ready to listen to his interlocutor. After all, he could have brushed her off or shown irritation, displeasure. But Sebastian looked at her with his dark, intelligent eyes and waited. I like you, and I have for a long time." Julia decided to get straight to the point. I don't know how to explain it. I'm drawn to you like a magnet. I've never felt this way before. I don't know what to do with all this." Julia lowered her eyes. Well, she had said it. What now? Sebastian was probably looking for words to politely turn her down. Most likely that was the case. Julia suddenly felt unbearably ashamed of her action. Why had she approached him? How could she look him in the eye after all this? "Julia." The next moment the girl felt a gentle touch, as if she were some incredibly fragile vessel. Julia. Her own name, uttered by Sebastian, sounded like beautiful music to the girl. "Julia, I couldn't even imagine such a thing." Sebastian looked at her and smiled, and he smiled so rarely. His eyes, the girl saw clearly, shone with happiness, sincere, real. What was happening? Was he happy about her confession? Instead of words, Sebastian kissed Julia. Her head spun from all this. He hugged her, or rather, even held her, because the girl's legs were literally giving way. He kissed her, then stroked her back and head, pressed her gently to him. "I've been watching you for a long time too, and I'm drawn to you in exactly the same way." "Then why? I never noticed anything. I thought you didn't care." "Didn't want to embarrass you. Foolish of me. And anyway, I'm older. Too old for you. I thought you were attracted to completely different guys. Brutal, successful. With looks like yours, anything is possible. You're unbelievably beautiful. You even inspired a song in me. I realize that Elven Princess is about you." "No," Julia confessed. "It's a very beautiful song. I like it. I never thought that it came about because of you." "Well, yes, only—" "And that girl? Who came with you? Are you together?" Together? Sebastian couldn't help but smirk. Together since my parents brought home a bundle tied with a pink ribbon from the maternity ward and said, "My sister." "So she's your sister," Julia laughed out loud, and I thought, that's why I decided to have this conversation today. Sister, sister. Sebastian held Julia closer and inhaled the scent of her hair. Just passing through the city. She's been married for a long time, lives far away with her husband. She just missed her good-for-nothing brother. Julia and Sebastian started dating. It turned out that all this time he had been attracted to the beautiful waitress. Why hadn't he made any moves? He had planned to, but later, when he had more financial freedom, he had a clear notion in his head. Girls aren't interested in failures. There was too much work with the band, organizing performances, and so on. But the guys were starting to earn money from their songs. The prospects were looking good. And, strange as it might be for a rock musician, Sebastian was shy when interacting with girls. No, he had many female friends he could chat and laugh with. But Julia, she aroused completely special feelings in him. And this made Sebastian, used to performing in front of hundreds of people, feel timid. But Julia took the first step, thus dispelling all of Sebastian's doubts. And now, they were together. Sebastian himself suggested moving in together. They decided to choose Julia's apartment to live in. Convenient location, reasonable cost, cozy room. So it turned out that Sebastian moved in with her. But he immediately took over paying the rent and minor repairs that every home periodically needs, and it also turned out that Sebastian was an excellent cook. A creative person, as a creative person should be, he created real masterpieces, in the recording studio and in the kitchen. He was tender, sensitive, attentive, completely immersed in his creativity, but never forgetting his loved one. They talked a lot, often went for walks. Sometimes they discussed the next song that was spinning in Sebastian's head and about to be born. Sometimes Julia would suggest the right phrase to her beloved, and he would eagerly seize upon the idea. And then the girl felt proud of herself. Well, she had participated in creating a hit. Julia completely dissolved in her feelings and new sensations. Before meeting Sebastian, she didn't even know what it was like to love a man. She hadn't had time for it. First diligent study, then attempts to survive. It turned out it was pleasant to have someone nearby who hugged you, was interested in your mood and well-being, looked at you with adoring eyes, like some kind of princess, and to melt from the touch of warm, strong hands, knowing at the same time that he, this tall man with black eyes, was ready to do anything for you. Alana didn't approve of her sister's choice. As always, she approached everything with her own yardstick. He's poor. He doesn't even have his own apartment. And no stable job, no business. He's a musician. He has his own rock band. So what? Who needs them anyway? There are tons of these one-hit wonder bands. Whether they'll succeed is unknown. I think you've bet on the wrong horse with your looks. It's a shame. Okay. Me? I have 3 children. Who needs me? So I make do with what I get. I don't complain. But you. However, Julia didn't expect her sister to understand. They had always been too different. But Julia didn't need understanding anyway. She was happy, loved. She had found a close, dear person. Yes, he was going through a difficult period now, but Sebastian was trying, working towards his goal, working hard, seeking the right contacts, planning things. Julia supported him in all his endeavors, and he appreciated her devotion, telling her many times that he was grateful to fate for such a gift. For her. One day, Sebastian embarked on a rather risky venture. He invited a famous rock band to Oakwood. The plan was for his band to open for the renowned musicians. This event was supposed to increase Sebastian's band's popularity, and organizing such concerts was also a way to earn good money. Only something went wrong. Not as many people came to the concert as planned. A large rock festival was taking place in the neighboring region. Sebastian hadn't considered this, or rather, he found out about the festival too late, when everything was already in motion. In short, Sebastian ended up deeply in the red, paying the musicians' fees, renting the venue and equipment, tickets for the rock band, advertising, All this was only half recouped by the money from the concert. The concert itself went well, but Sebastian accumulated huge debts that needed to be paid off as soon as possible. But with what? It was hard for Julia to watch her beloved during this period. He looked lost, anxious. She wanted to help him in some way. But how? Where would the money come from? Sebastian took out a loan, but it was just a drop in the ocean. His friends helped him. The situation improved, but the debt was still quite substantial. And then Julia offered her help. She had savings, money she had been putting aside for her studies. Not much, of course, but still something. In addition, the girl did something she had been against for a long time. She sold the gold jewelry her mother had given her for her 18th birthday. These funds were enough to cover the debt. Where did this come from? Sebastian was surprised when Julia handed him several stacks of crisp new bills. Well, someone unexpectedly paid back a debt to me. Plus, the insurance finally paid out for Mom's case. The girl lied. She knew. If she told Sebastian the truth, he would never take the money from her. But this way, it seemed like it wasn't her last resort. Thank you, Sebastian hugged Julia tightly. I'll pay it all back, you'll see. We'll be famous soon, and I'll pay everything back. Sebastian paid off the debt and continued to develop the band. Julia slowly paid off the loan. Saving for her studies was no longer possible. And anyway, her salary suddenly became much smaller. The bar was going through tough times. It was good that Sebastian bought groceries and paid the apartment rent, meaning he took on the main part of the expenses. Sebastian's income came from a few corporate gigs and occasional odd jobs. Unstable earnings, but still a stream that hadn't dried up. Sometimes plenty, sometimes little. Julia didn't worry, basking in Sebastian's attention, his love and care, and generously giving him tenderness, love, and support. Julia tried not to think about the future, especially. Well, she wouldn't re-enroll in university this year. She'd do it next year. It wasn't a big deal. She still had time. The main thing was he was there. Sebastian. Julia hadn't known before that she was capable of such feelings. And then Sebastian disappeared. No, he didn't run away from Julia. Nothing terrible happened to him. It started as a business trip. Sebastian grabbed Julia by the shoulders and even shook her slightly. His eyes burned like two bright searchlights. Can you imagine? I was invited to the States to write music for a band. They found me online, they liked it, and now they're inviting me. Julia couldn't believe her ears. She knew the band Sebastian was talking about. They were very popular musicians touring all over the world, and they had noticed Sebastian. They were offering him a collaboration. Incredible. I'll have to leave for a while, Sebastian continued. Do you understand what that means? Julia nodded. She understood. Money, fame, dizzying opportunities for Sebastian's growth and development as a musician, useful contacts and connections. He would get what he hadn't even dared to dream of. They would have to part for an indefinite time. After all, Sebastian had said clearly, I'll have to leave. I, not we. The packing began. Sebastian had a lot of things to sort out. Firstly, find a replacement. Someone had to play in his band temporarily while he was away, of course. Secondly, Sebastian started processing his passport and visa. Thirdly, gathering the necessary things. In all this hustle and bustle, he seemed to have completely forgotten about Julia. Sebastian was too engrossed in the upcoming changes, the opening prospects. The girl looked at him and understood. He would forget about her. He would forget her there, in another country, deafened by new impressions, inspired by work and success. Perhaps Sebastian would even find someone there. He hugged her so tenderly in the evenings, so sincerely assured her that he would miss her. Time will fly by quickly. And besides, there's video calls. We'll be in constant contact with each other. At least I'll finally earn a decent living, pay you back the debt. I know how much you need that money. Maybe we'll even buy an apartment. My band will take off. I'll gain invaluable experience there, understand what and how. Everything will be fine. Sebastian sincerely believed this. Julia saw. He wasn't lying. wasn't being cunning. But something told the girl everything would change as soon as her beloved was abroad. Sebastian himself just didn't realize it yet. That's how it turned out in the end. At first, Sebastian called every day, as he had promised, talking about how he was settling in his new place. Everything delighted him. Impressions overwhelmed him. Then he suddenly disappeared from the radar. He just vanished. He didn't call himself, and he didn't answer Julia's calls. Long rings consistently ended with a message that the subscriber was probably busy and couldn't answer. Julia was initially alarmed, thought something had happened to him, something terrible, irreparable. But soon she saw a recent performance of that very band on a music channel. Sebastian was with them. He looked very changed, more mature, even more serious than usual. So he was fine. He had just apparently decided to start a new life and cut off all previous ties, including forgetting about her, about Julia. At first, the girl still hoped, waited for him to call, to explain. But Sebastian disappeared completely, vanished from her life. Julia made it a rule to watch the music channel every day. From time to time, she saw Sebastian. He was never in the spotlight, but he sometimes appeared in the camera lens. And quite often, a girl was next to him. The same one. Either the band's makeup artist or costume designer. Beautiful, striking. By all appearances, there was something between her and Sebastian. There had to be. Julia was desperately jealous of Sebastian, both of this girl and of her beloved's other potential muses. It hurt her. It hurt more than ever. And she was also offended. And scared. Scared to be alone again, without the support and warmth of a loved one. An unpleasant mix of feelings and emotions. And there were other problems, more pressing ones. Financial. Julia was barely making ends meet. After all, she had a tiny salary and a loan. In the end, the bar did go bankrupt. New owners bought it, turned it into a hookah lounge. Julia had to quit, like all the bar's former employees. Another blow. This place held special memories and feelings for Julia, and now the bar was gone. The cozy bar where you could always enjoy live music, where a friendly, warm atmosphere reigned. Sebastian would have understood her, supported her. Everything was generally easier and more pleasant with him, but he was hundreds of miles away from her and, it seemed, had already forgotten to even think about her. Sebastian had no idea what a desperate situation she was in. He still didn't know about the loan. He thought Julia had helped him with an extra sum she had unexpectedly received. And of course, he didn't guess about her losing her job. And even if he had known, he didn't have time for Julia now. Julia didn't have time to dwell on grievances and think about what might have been. She desperately needed a job, preferably a well-paying one. And so the girl tirelessly monitored job postings, looking for something that would help her climb out of the financial hole. It was good that the landlord agreed to wait for the rent payment. But his patience wasn't limitless either. A little more, and Julia would be asked to leave. This announcement caught Julia's attention because of the amount offered for the services. A decent figure. It could solve many of the girl's problems. But the job itself seemed too unfamiliar to Julia. They needed a caregiver for a little girl. Apparently, she was unwell. The diagnosis wasn't disclosed, but it was made clear. The child needed round-the-clock supervision and care, including administering medication on schedule, accompanying her to procedures, and so on. Julia thought about it. She had experience caring for little ones. The girl even enjoyed playing with her nephews and nieces. She knew how to get along with young children, knew how to feed them, change them, keep them occupied. But here it was about a sick child, apparently seriously ill. Could she do it? At least it was worth trying. Julia called the number provided. A pleasant male voice answered. This man asked the girl a few questions: age, occupation, education, experience with young children, and she was invited for an interview. Julia was nervous the day before. She wanted to get this job. It was as necessary to Julia as air. It was such a chance to climb out of the financial hole, to stay afloat. Where else could she find such a salary? So the girl was anxious, worried. What if they didn't hire her? What then? Look for a waitress job again and work for peanuts? A taxi brought Julia to a suburban cottage village, an elite area, tall, beautiful houses surrounded by fences. At the gate, the girl was met by a woman, a housekeeper, as Julia later learned, and in fact, the person who did everything, cleaning, cooking, laundry, because her employer, Victor Harrison, was always too busy. Businessmen generally had very little free time. Victor Harrison met the job seeker in the living room. He was a man in his 40s with intelligent, piercing blue eyes, perfectly styled hair with a touch of gray, an athletic build. Yes, this man clearly paid attention to his health and appearance. Julia was intimidated at first. How to start a conversation with someone like that? Next to him, she suddenly felt utterly insignificant. "Good morning." Victor Harrison smiled warmly, and Julia's embarrassment vanished. The man's smile was open and kind. Victor Harrison immediately seemed like a familiar person. "Hello," Julia smiled back. "I'm here about the advertisement." "That's very good. I'll tell you right away. I need a caregiver for my daughter, Sonia dear. She's in a very serious condition right now, so it's not something everyone can handle. Her health is monitored by doctors. They are here every day. I could hire a nurse for Sonia, but how can I put this? There's already a lot of pain in her life, a lot of people in white coats. I would like someone else to be with her. Well, a young girl like you. Cheerful, knows many songs and stories, knows how to cheer up a child, inspire her, come up with some interesting activity. In short, brighten up her leisure time." What's wrong with your little girl?" Julia couldn't help but ask. "Who knows?" Victor Harrison lowered his eyes. His gaze became heavy and tense. "Sonia dear has been examined everywhere. No one can figure anything out. Her body, it's as if it's destroying itself. There are no signs of autoimmune aggression. They constantly take tests. They would have noticed. But she's fading, and nothing helps her. Poor little thing. The doctors say they can. Do you understand? They're not all powerful, unfortunately. In short, Sonia needs more than just a nanny. For that, we have Mrs. Peterson, our beloved housekeeper. She'll feed her, give her medicine on time. And we don't just need a caregiver either. Sonia is supervised by nurses. They perform all the necessary procedures. Sonia dear needs more of a friend, perhaps. Someone who can give her positive emotions. Doctors say that's very important in her condition. And looking at you, I think you're just that kind of person. Young, beautiful, cheerful, and you have kind eyes. You know how to empathize. That's good." Julia nodded. She already wanted to see Sonia as soon as possible. If the little one needed positive emotions, she would provide them. Julia would definitely cheer up the girl who had been struck by such a serious illness, brighten the gray days of the little patient, find a way to make her life more pleasant. "If you're ready to start working right now," Victor Harrison continued, "then let's begin. A trial period, say, 3 days. And then Sonia will decide. Of course, you'll be paid for your time in any case. So, do you agree?" "Yes," Julia nodded. "Excellent," Victor Harrison beamed. "Then Mrs. Peterson will introduce you to Sonia, dear, and I must go. I have business." When the door closed behind Victor Harrison, Mrs. Peterson, a middle-aged woman with an unusually soft and cozy gaze, turned to Julia and asked, "Have you spent time with little ones before? Do you know what young children are like?" "I have nephews and nieces," Julia nodded. "That's good," Mrs. Peterson shook her head. "But our Sonia, dear, she's an unusual child. You've probably already realized that. Sonia hardly gets out of bed. She gets tired quickly. It's hard to interest her in anything. But you have to. Sonia needs to be distracted from her pain, from her suffering, and she also needs to go for walks. At least an hour a day, the doctor said." "I understand. Well, now let's go meet her." Julia followed Mrs. Peterson upstairs to the second floor. She entered the children's room. It was a spacious princess room. A huge window let in a lot of daylight. Along the walls stretched shelves with expensive toys and books. Right in the center of the room was a mini playground. There was a slide, swings, even a trampoline. A little further away was a ball pit, and closer to the door stood a bed. What a bed it was! Large, round, with a pink canopy. Julia looked around with curiosity. She had never seen rooms like this before. Was all this for one child? Amidst this splendor, Julia didn't immediately notice the small mistress of the room. The girl was lying in bed surrounded by large, soft toys. There was Bartholomew the cat, a fluffy white bear, a bright green crocodile with flowers all over its body, and a thin, pale 7-year-old girl, quite translucent and almost blending in with the white bedding due to her unhealthy skin tone. Huge blue eyes, like her father's, looked at the newcomers with curiosity. Sonia propped herself up on her elbows, although it cost her a great effort, and addressed Mrs. Peterson. "Who is this with you? A new rehabilitation specialist?" The complex word slipped easily and habitually from the little one's lips, and it was somehow completely unnatural. "No, sweetie, this is your new friend. Her name is Julia. You'll play together." "With dolls?" Sonia brightened slightly. "Whatever you want," Julia smiled at her. The girl aroused pity. "I love playing with dolls very much. That's good because Vera is always busy, and Dad doesn't know how to play at all." "Adults have a lot of things to do," Julia shrugged. "That's why they're sometimes boring," Sonia suggested and smiled conspiratorially. "Boring," Julia agreed. Sonia dear giggled softly. "Well, I see you'll be fine," Mrs. Peterson exhaled. "You entertain yourselves here and I'll go make lunch. And Sonia, you remember the nurse is coming today, right?" "I remember," the girl frowned. "Another IV?" "Well, what can we do, dear?" Mrs. Peterson kissed the girl on the top of her head and left the room. Julia was left alone with Sonia. "Well, shall we play?" the girl asked her charge with a smile. "My eyes are just darting everywhere." "Better read to me?" the girl asked. It seemed the short conversation had taken her last strength. Sonia sank back onto the pillows, pulled the blanket over her thin body, although the room was warm. "Okay," Julia agreed. The child's weakness surprised and horrified her. 7-year-olds. They were such energy bombs. Like Leo, her older nephew. He was Sonia Deer's age, but you couldn't get him to sit still for 5 minutes, always climbing somewhere, inventing something. If the boy had suddenly found himself in this room, he would immediately have started jumping on the trampoline or sliding down the slide. Alana called him a perpetual motion machine. And Mila and Christina weren't far behind their brother, although they were younger. But Sonia lay there, poor thing, flat. "What should I read to you?" "About princesses. The book is on the windowsill. Vera started reading to me, but she's busy. Okay, you continue." It was a heavy, beautiful book with bright pictures, but the story itself, it seemed somehow silly, boring, predictable, and formulaic to Julia. She herself hadn't liked such fairy tales as a child. How about we make up a story about these princesses ourselves?" As Julia expected, interest flickered in Sonia Deer's tired eyes. "How?" she asked. "Very simple. I start, you continue." The activity captivated Sonia. She inventively made up adventures for the princess. Sometimes she rode in a race car, sometimes a dragon kidnapped the heroine, and then a prince rescued her. The girl's imagination flowed freely. It seemed she had been lacking such interaction for a long time. Then Mrs. Peterson entered the room. Seeing that Julia and Sonia had gotten along, she was pleased. The woman brought lunch, cream soup, stewed vegetables. Sonia grimaced. "I don't want it," she said. "I don't want to eat at all, and definitely not all this." Mrs. Peterson looked at Julia. The woman clearly expected help from her. "Let me feed you," Julia said to Sonia. "Each spoonful is another adventure for the princess. I'll make them up as I go. Can you imagine how much I'll have to tell you? What do you think will run out first, your food or my imagination?" The trick worked. The food ran out faster than Julia's imagination, but Sonia demanded more stories. Mrs. Peterson threw up her hands in surprise, smiled, and left. A nurse entered. Sonia immediately became gloomy. She was almost asleep. Lunch and the story had tired her, but it was time for procedures. IV? The girl asked the nurse hopelessly. The nurse nodded sympathetically. I'll do it quickly. Don't be scared, it won't hurt. You'll sleep afterward, and we'll have some tea. Mrs. Peterson pulled Julia by the sleeve. You're not needed here right now. The housekeeper led Julia to the spacious kitchen. Steaming cups of coffee and a fragrant pie, which looked like it had just come out of the oven, were waiting on the table. I see you've gotten along with Sonia, dear, the woman smiled, looking warmly at Julia. That's good. Sonia chased away the previous nanny, but she took to you right away. I already called Victor Harrison, told him everything. He's very pleased and happy. He told me to take care of you. I'm happy too, Julia smiled. I just feel so sorry for Sonia. My nephews and nieces, they're so noisy, so cheerful, and she lies in bed and can't even play anything. It's scary. What do the doctors say? Are there chances? No prognosis, Mrs. Peterson shook her head. They can't even make a diagnosis. They just treat the symptoms, that's all. Now after the IV, Sonia dear will feel better for a while. You can go for a walk after her nap. Victor Harrison is the girl's father, I understand that. Where is her mother? On a business trip? Does she also have a demanding job so she can't be with her daughter? Oh, if only, Mrs. Peterson sighed. Our Lena, dear, she's gone. The birth was difficult. The doctors saved the baby and didn't notice that the mother needed help. And she herself, Lena, didn't complain about anything. She was worried about the baby. That's how it turned out. The day after giving birth, Lena's temperature rose, high. Examination, intensive care. While this and that, her heart just stopped. Some internal bleeding opened up in the poor thing. A rare case. And Sonia dear was also in intensive care. She was born prematurely. It was a difficult time. How sad. It is indeed sad, Mrs. Peterson agreed. Let me tell you the whole story. It looks like you'll be here for a while, so you should know. Victor grew up in a prosperous, complete family. Loving mother and father, caring, attentive grandparents. His own room, trips to the sea every summer, birthdays, friends. Victor had a happy childhood, an equally happy youth. He graduated from school with a gold medal, largely thanks to his parents, who were not indifferent to their son's education. If they saw gaps, they immediately hired the best tutors for Victor. And the boy studied English in foreign camps. He rested and got an education at the same time. Trips to such places cost unimaginable amounts, and they were not easy to get. But for their beloved son, especially if he was so desired and long awaited. Victor had quite elderly parents. They couldn't have a child for many years. The couple had resigned themselves to such a fate. But then, when hope was gone, life suddenly threw a surprise. It gave the couple an heir after all. Needless to say, Victor was never ashamed of his parents. Yes, he saw. His mother and father were much older than his classmates' relatives, but the boy, on the contrary, was proud of them. Because Victor's father was a well-known businessman in the city, and his mother was the chief physician of the regional hospital. And everyone knew them. Everyone respected them. It never occurred to Victor to be ashamed of his family. Victor grew up. His parents aged rapidly, declined. When the guy was in his third year of university, his father passed away. Stroke, intensive care, coma, and that was it. Victor felt like an adult for the first time then. Of course, because he, a student, had to delve into the affairs of the company his parent had left him as an inheritance. No, Victor had been interested in his father's business since his teens. He knew a lot, even had signing authority. And yet, for the first time, he entrusted most of the processes to the manager, a colleague, a longtime friend of his deceased parent, because Victor needed to study and support his mother, who had declined greatly after her husband's death. 3 years passed. Victor had just received his diploma, had just taken the helm of his father's company, had just begun to gain strength. And then another blow. This time, his mother. The guy was left completely alone. Victor felt miserable and lonely in the large family home. It was good that Mrs. Peterson was there, the housekeeper, and almost a member of the family. She had known Victor since he was a baby and treated him like her own son. The woman had no children of her own. She gave all her care to the inconsolable young man. Work pulled him through then. He had to make decisions, go places, hold meetings, sign contracts, and all that. That's what saved my dear Victor back then. Time passed. Victor transformed from a young, inexperienced guy into a smart, shrewd man, a talented businessman. Mrs. Peterson rejoiced, looking at her charge. He had matured, grown stronger, gained self-confidence. The housekeeper wanted him to find a good wife, marry her, and become a father. Only then would Mrs. Peterson's heart be at peace. Only he didn't have anyone special, Mrs. Peterson said. No, some girls hung around Victor. He's a handsome, wealthy guy. They're always in demand. But he'd date one, then another. It wasn't right. I saw they weren't in my dear Victor's heart, and I didn't like them either. It always seemed like they just wanted his money, some kind of flirts. And then Lena dear appeared. Victor met Lena literally on the street. She was walking on the sidewalk, hurrying somewhere, as it turned out later, to an interview at Victor's company. Lena had recently been laid off. The factory where she had worked as an accountant for several years after college suddenly closed. Lena was now looking for a new place, and Victor had gone out for a walk to clear his head. He even had a goal, to buy donuts at the bakery around the corner. And then fate brought the young people face to face, literally. Lena rushed out from around the corner too quickly and bumped into an unsuspecting Victor. From then on, everything was like in some romantic music video. Lena's bag slipped from her shoulder, the contents scattered across the asphalt. Victor and Lena rushed to pick it all up. The girl stammered apologies. Victor assured her everything was fine and admired the girl's beautiful gray eyes. It was love at first sight. When the young people had sorted out the bag and its spilled contents, they looked up and smiled at each other. And Victor, being a man, took the first step. He learned the beautiful stranger's name and then introduced himself. They walked slowly and talked, getting to know each other. When Victor learned that Lena was hurrying to his office, he beamed. He understood that this beautiful girl was his destiny, and it was no accident that they met in such an interesting way, rather than seeing each other for the first time in the office. It was more romantic, more interesting, more pleasant. In short, Mrs. Peterson had never seen Victor so happy. Lena turned out to be intelligent, understanding, kind. She also quickly found common ground with Mrs. Peterson, which was important. A sweet, sweet girl. And why did she have such a fate? Mrs. Peterson shook her head ruefully. A couple of years after meeting, Victor and Lena got married. They were a wonderful couple, harmonious, happy. Love, mutual understanding, and respect reigned. Mrs. Peterson's heart rejoiced when she saw them together, her beloved Victor and his wonderful, beautiful wife. But they both decided not to rush with children, Mrs. Peterson continued her story. It was their joint decision, as if they felt something. They traveled, worked, met with friends, and I, foolish old woman, kept advising them not to delay. I wanted a child too. Victor and Lena lived for themselves for a long time, a full 5 years after the wedding. They were happy together. No, they wanted children, but not immediately, later. For now, everything suited them. And then the news of Lena's pregnancy. It was an unplanned event, but everyone in the household welcomed it joyfully. Well, it seems the time has come, Victor summarized, but decided he had waited long enough. Thank God, Mrs. Peterson exclaimed, throwing up her hands. I think you'll have a boy. You've become so beautiful, Lena. Girls take away their mother's beauty during pregnancy. But the housekeeper was mistaken. The ultrasound confirmed that Lena was expecting a girl. Healthy, strong. They even showed me her picture. They take pictures of babies. When I looked, she was the spitting image of Lena dear. That's how our Sonia dear was born, looking like her mother. Sonia. Lena chose the name for their daughter. Victor and Mrs. Peterson didn't object. They both liked it very much. The pregnancy wasn't easy. At first, Lena suffered from morning sickness. Then it seemed to subside, but other problems replaced it. High blood pressure, swelling. The baby developed well, but the mother, she suffered, faded before their eyes, refused to eat, lay in bed a lot. Usually energetic Lena lacked the strength even to go downstairs. Mrs. Peterson carried her food directly to the bedroom. The woman felt sorry for Lena, helped her in any way she could, and assured her that everything would pass after the daughter was born. Children don't come easily to women, Mrs. Peterson sighed. Pregnancy completely exhausted Lena. Look, remember your sister? Children came relatively easily to her. In short, Lena's labor began much earlier than expected. She was threatened with complications throughout the pregnancy, so fortunately, at that moment the expectant mother was in the hospital under medical supervision. They tried to stop the process, but it didn't work. Sonia dear was born. She didn't cry. They didn't place her on Lena's chest, didn't even show her to her. When it comes to newborns who need to stay in the mother's womb for at least 3 more months, everything happens differently. Sonia dear was immediately sent to intensive care. The fight for her life began. And Lena? With Lena, everything seemed fine at first. Well, she was tired, of course, after giving birth. She was worried about her daughter, perfectly understandable and natural. Doctors examined the new mother, found no abnormalities, and sent her to her room. It was only later that serious symptoms appeared, but it was too late. Victor and I were so worried about the little girl. Mrs. Peterson was close to tears. It was clear that even now, 7 years later, it was hard for her to remember all this. We thought the little one wouldn't survive. She was born too early, too weak. Then, when Victor got a call from the hospital in the morning and was told that his wife had died from internal bleeding, he didn't even believe his ears at first. He thought they were talking about Sonia dear. His mind refused to accept what he heard. But no, Sonia had pulled through. She turned out to be a strong girl. But Lena, she was gone. And with him. She was gone from him. I thought he would. But he recovered. He had to work. He had to help Sonia dear pull through. To be completely honest, at first, he treated his daughter poorly. He blamed her for what happened to Lena. He knew he shouldn't, but he couldn't help himself. He was angry at her, that was all. Sonia dear was discharged. A nanny was hired for her, but she couldn't care for such an infant. Mrs. Peterson was too old for that, but she gladly played with Sonia dear, pushed her in the stroller in the yard, talked to her a lot. And she was the only one who gave the newborn the love she so desperately needed. She's like a granddaughter to me, the housekeeper smiled. I accepted her right away, but Victor, it took him a long time to warm up. No, he bought everything she needed, sometimes went for walks with her, but only if I made him. He didn't show initiative himself. And then, one day, Sonia dear got sick. Her temperature soared, nothing helped. She was vomiting, the poor thing. It was a flu that was going around. It tormented many people then. And little ones, they had a particularly hard time with it. Well, in short, Sonia dear ended up back in the hospital. The doctors gave no prognosis, and that's when Victor came to his senses. He dropped everything, sat by his daughter's bed for days. He sang her songs, told her poems, rocked her in his arms. And Sonia dear, it was as if she felt her father's care. She immediately started to recover. Our little one was discharged, and Victor became completely different with her. A real father, loving and caring. Life went on. Victor worked a lot, found time to spend with his daughter. Sonia dear grew, delighted her father and Mrs. Peterson with excellent health and rare intelligence. And everything seemed fine. Only Mrs. Peterson worried that Victor was still alone. It seemed to her that he wouldn't be happy until he met a woman. Only now it was a very difficult task. Victor's chosen one. She had to love and accept Sonia dear. Otherwise, there could be no talk of any union. Well, God heard my prayers, Mrs. Peterson smiled, and Victor got Larissa, a beauty, you couldn't take your eyes off her, and smart too. She herself had a child, a daughter, a little younger than Sonia dear. They made a wonderful family. Larissa got a job at Victor's company, and it all started at some corporate event. In short, a typical story. Larissa treated Sonia well. She often took her and her younger daughter somewhere. Sometimes she took the girls to the amusement park, sometimes to the cinema. Sonia dear loved both Larissa and her younger stepsister Alice. She was truly happy. Victor and Larissa got married, started living together. And then Sonia dear's symptoms began. First dizziness, then nausea, weakness, lack of appetite. Examinations at the best clinics, trips to doctors abroad, consultations with renowned professors. All this yielded no results. The doctors couldn't make a correct diagnosis. The girl was fading before their eyes. The first year she was still okay, on her feet. Mrs. Peterson was close to tears again. It was clear that her heart truly ached for the little girl. But after the new year, she was completely bedridden. She's doing badly now. It's so scary for her, and it's unclear what kind of illness has struck our little one. Larissa and her daughter temporarily moved back to her apartment. It's just that Alice went to kindergarten, brought home infections from there, and for Sonia dear, that was extremely dangerous. So Larissa and Victor made that decision. No, Larissa comes often. Almost every day she's a good person. She visits Sonia dear. And she brings Alice sometimes too, when she's not sick with anything. But ever since she started kindergarten, it's been one sick leave after another. So that's how they are. Wife with one child separately, husband with his older daughter separately. That's their family. Well, what can you do? It's the situation. It's a strange situation indeed, Julia said. She was shaken by Victor's and Sonia's story. You could make a TV series out of it. Well, that's how it is, the elderly woman shrugged. I see you've gotten along with Sonia, dear. That's good. Everything will be more pleasant with you. Days flowed into days. Julia now lived in a room next to Sonia dear's, but the girl often asked the caregiver to stay the night in her bedroom. Sonia had a very comfortable couch there. Julia made up a bed on it. They talked before going to sleep, held hands. Julia saw it was very important to Sonia. The girl clearly lacked attention, despite the fact that there were many adults around her. Victor was a very caring and anxious father and a pleasant person to talk to. They often discussed Sonia. The man always listened attentively to Julia, didn't interrupt or argue, asked the right questions. Julia also met Larissa. Yes, she was a very beautiful woman. Chiseled cheekbones, beautifully curved lips, the grace of a panther. A true queen. But when Larissa interacted with Sonia dear, when she adjusted the blanket on the girl, smiled at her, stroked the little one's head, Julia couldn't shake the feeling that the woman was being fake. It showed in seemingly insignificant details, a cold glint in her eyes, a forced smile, something elusive and very unpleasant. One day, Julia had a strange dream. The girl found herself in a room, peeling wallpaper, creaky floors. She sat on a wobbly stool by a dark window through which nothing could be seen, and she understood that she was dreaming. She desperately wanted to wake up. But then, where did she come from? Lena seemed to grow out of thin air before her. Julia recognized her because she had seen Sonia dear's mother in photographs. Lena smiled sadly and looked at Julia with a warm and very soft gaze. "Watch her," she said in a quiet, melodic voice. "Watch Larissa. All the troubles come from her. She is dangerous." Having said this, she dissolved into the air. And Julia had wanted to ask her so many questions. How to watch? Why? How was she dangerous? Julia woke up in a cold sweat. Or rather, she felt as if she had flown into her body, fallen into it. A strange sensation. Lena's words still echoed in her head. No, Julia didn't believe in the supernatural. But the dream, which barely resembled a dream at all, more like a journey through time and worlds. The strange dream wouldn't leave her. Larissa was not there the next day, and Julia waited for her. She knew for sure. This woman was involved in something bad. Larissa was somehow harming this family and didn't love Sonia. She didn't sympathize with the girl, but only pretended to care. And how could the others not notice? Even experienced, long-lived Mrs. Peterson. Larissa appeared the next day. As always, beautiful, brightly made up, languid. The first thing she did was go up to Sonia Dear to say hello. Then she went down to the kitchen. "Sonia wants a drink," Larissa said, looking at Mrs. Peterson. "Let me make her some cocoa." "Let me do it," the housekeeper fussed. "No, I can manage. I want to do it for her." "You're so thoughtful." Julia remained silent. She watched Larissa, just as Lena had asked her to in that dream. For some reason, it seemed that this was it, the important moment. As if Lena was nearby, prompting her to be vigilant. Mrs. Peterson was busy with dough. Julia pretended to look out the window, but she was watching Larissa. And there it was. The woman skillfully pulled a small vial from her sleeve, dripped a few drops from it into the milk, and immediately hid the vial back. Only a couple of seconds, a few deft movements. But Julia saw everything. "The drink for the princess is ready," Larissa smiled. "Julia, dear, could you please get her favorite cup?" Julia obeyed. She took Sonia Dear's cup with characters from the girl's favorite cartoon, and she understood. Sonia must not drink this. She must not. She had to act. Julia pretended to slip. She bumped into Larissa, who dropped the cup from her hands. The cup fell, shattered. The cocoa splashed onto the floor. "I'm sorry, I'm so clumsy," Julia fussed, grabbed a cloth, and started wiping up the spilled puddle, collecting the shards. "It's nothing, I'll make another one." Hidden irritation was evident in Larissa's voice. Julia couldn't do that again. It would arouse suspicion. So she had to accept that Sonia Dear would receive cocoa from her stepmother's hands. While Larissa and Mrs. Peterson were with Sonia, Julia squeezed the cloth she had used to wipe up the cocoa into a clean jar. She needed to know exactly what Larissa had put in the cocoa. Maybe it was just ordinary vitamins, and then there was no need to panic. But something told the girl that wasn't the case. She had to wait 2 days for the test results. Seeing the report, Julia was horrified. The drink contained poison. Deadly. The symptoms of poisoning matched those Sonia Dear had. So, the girl's weakness was explained by the fact that her stepmother was systematically poisoning her, just like in a terrible fairy tale. Julia didn't know who to turn to with her news. Mrs. Peterson? But what could she do? Victor. He might not believe her. What should she do? Larissa couldn't be allowed near the girl anymore. She wanted to send her to the next world and had almost succeeded in her endeavor. And yet Julia, gathering her courage, spoke with Victor. She told him everything, about her strange dream, about the cocoa, and about the analysis. Julia was afraid he would yell at her, call her names, kick her out, or worse, accuse her of wanting to harm his daughter herself. "You know," Victor said, looking at Julia, "I would probably have fired you immediately after those words. It's very strange, you must admit, but just yesterday I also had an unusual dream. Lena, she asked me to believe you. Just believe. Nothing more. Let's not tell anyone about this for now. And take some time off. I need to figure everything out. Mrs. Peterson will call you when you can come back to work." Julia spent those few days on edge. She didn't know what was happening in Victor's house and was very worried about Sonia Dear, to whom she had already become attached with all her heart. But Victor said to wait for the call, so she would wait. Mrs. Peterson called. Julia, seeing her name on the screen, became nervous. What would she be told now? How did it go? "Come," Mrs. Peterson simply said. "Come quickly. Sonia Dear misses you very much." Julia didn't need much persuading. Half an hour later, she was at Victor's house. The owner himself opened the door, still as calm and imperturbable. From his appearance, it was difficult to guess what had happened. "I want to thank you," the man finally allowed himself to smile. "You were right. Larissa, she really wanted to. I'm even afraid to say it out loud. That scoundrel wanted to poison Sonia. To think of it, Mrs. Peterson didn't mince words, and I trusted her so much. The story turned out to be mundane and old as the world. Greedy Larissa was not going to tolerate a rival in the form of her wealthy husband's beloved daughter. She wanted her own daughter, Alice, to be the sole heir to all of Victor's fortune. Well, first herself, of course. Larissa had once studied to be a pharmacist, although she never worked a day in the profession, preferring to live off wealthy admirers. Nature had generously endowed her with beauty, so the woman had opportunities for such an existence. The knowledge gained in college was enough to devise a way to send the hated stepdaughter to the next world. Poison. Poison that was difficult to detect in the blood. And Larissa poured the toxic substance into the food she prepared for Sonia dear, and the girl weakened, slowly faded. She was almost there. It's unbelievable, it's beyond comprehension. Mrs. Peterson couldn't calm down. Julia understood her. Indeed, Larissa's act was monstrous. How could she do that to a defenseless child? Sonia dear had trusted her, loved her. In short, Victor installed surveillance cameras in the kitchen. That's how it was discovered that Larissa added poison to Sonia's food every time. Sometimes she cooked something for the girl herself. Sometimes she was cunning. She poured from the vial into food prepared by Mrs. Peterson. I myself carried that poison to Sonia dear with my own hands. Mrs. Peterson was close to tears again. In short, Larissa was caught red-handed. She was currently under investigation. Alice was taken by her father, a man who had long wanted to communicate with his child, but was prevented because he was too poor for it, unworthy. Alice will be fine, Mrs. Peterson assured. The child is not to blame for what her mother wanted to do. And Sonia dear, how is she? And Sonia dear is wonderful, a clear voice rang out from somewhere behind them. Julia turned around and met Sonia dear's eyes. She was still very thin and pale, but she already had enough strength to walk around the house. A real miracle. Doctors said she would recover quickly now. Julia and Sebastian strolled slowly along the windows of a children's store. It was the girls' section, so it seemed to both of them as if they had entered a kingdom of pink and purple. Dolls, children's cosmetic sets, soft toys. Their eyes darted everywhere. When I was in the States, a guy bought his nephew a voice-controlled robot. That's something. Maybe Sonia would like something similar. She's a girl, Julia reminded him. She definitely wants a doll, a cartoon character. We need to try to find one. Maybe by her next birthday she won't want toys at all anymore. Children grow up so fast. Amazing. We'll see for ourselves soon. Sebastian placed his hand on Julia's rounded belly. The baby responded immediately, still a weak but already quite noticeable kick. And that one still needed a job. And Julia had already gotten used to everyone, the girl, Mrs. Peterson, even Victor Harrison. She didn't want to leave them. The adults had initially decided not to tell Sonia the truth about what had happened to her. It was too terrible a story. But the clever girl managed to put two and two together. She overheard something, figured something out herself. This story didn't have a strong, destructive effect on her, as the adults had feared. Sonia took it all quite calmly. It's just like in fairy tales, the girl shrugged. The little one was returning to life. In September, she started school with her peers. And Julia? Julia was finally able to re-enroll in university. She chose distance learning because she needed not only to study, but also to work. True, her work now resembled living with a family, with loved ones, sweet, cheerful Sonia dear, kind, wise Mrs. Peterson, always busy but polite and attentive Victor Harrison. With these people, Julia felt cozy, warm, and comfortable. They had accepted her, and were also very grateful to her for saving Sonia dear. It was scary to think what might have happened if it hadn't been for that strange dream. They discussed this unusual event. First with Victor, then with Mrs. Peterson. Mrs. Peterson was sure. Lena dear had broken through time and worlds to save her daughter. Victor just shook his head, not expressing his opinion. And Julia? She didn't know what to think. Perhaps Larissa had immediately aroused her suspicion, as the stepmother hadn't appealed to her from the first glance, in the dream only. But Victor also dreamed of Lena, and she asked him to believe Julia. That was harder to explain. That day, Julia left the house alone. Sonia dear was doing her homework. Mrs. Peterson was busy around the house. Julia needed to go to the university, take some documents to the dean's office. And then suddenly, Sebastian stepped towards her. Julia couldn't believe her eyes. She recoiled. He looked at Julia as if no one in the world was more important to him. "I finally found you," he said, and unable to restrain himself, pulled her close. Julia didn't understand anything, but she didn't resist. She clung to her beloved, enjoyed his closeness, and tried not to think about Sebastian's betrayal, about his sudden disappearance. The explanation turned out to be ridiculously simple. Sebastian had simply dropped his phone in the ocean during a boat trip. Naturally, the gadget was gone forever. Julia wasn't registered on social media, so he simply couldn't contact her. There was no way. Sebastian wrote letters, like in the good old days, sent telegrams. But Julia, she had moved in with Victor and hardly ever appeared at home, so the letters piled up in the mailbox. When she returned home, she saw that the mailbox door was broken. Someone had opened the box for some reason and taken the letters. Maybe children, maybe a curious neighbor. In short, Julia received no news from Sebastian, and that's why she decided he had forgotten about her, started a new life, betrayed her. I couldn't drop everything and leave. It concerned my career and our future, our well-being. Without you, without news of you, it was unbearable. But I knew I had to wait. And then, financially, I would provide for us for many years to come. And then I could fly to you and explain everything. I didn't even imagine what a difficult situation you were in. I didn't know you had to take out a loan. I knew nothing about you losing your job. How hard it must have been for you. It was that simple. An unfortunate turn of events. Julia rejoiced that her feelings and Sebastian's feelings were real, that there was no betrayal or deceit in her life. Just a misunderstanding that had finally been resolved. Sebastian now had a contract with a well-known metropolitan producer. He had everything he had dreamed of: concerts, performances, tours, opportunities to bring his music to people who were ready to receive it. And money, of course. Money. Sebastian was even able to buy an apartment for the two of them. Renovations were in full swing there now. Julia and Sebastian got married. They were already expecting a child. Julia felt happy and loved. She no longer worked for Victor. And Sonia, who had grown stronger and more mature, didn't need a round-the-clock nanny caregiver. But they all remained friends. And right now, Julia and Sebastian were choosing for their future baby.